The room froze when she smirked. "You know I'm marrying him for the money, right?" I didn't flinch. I just nodded once. That night, her words lingered louder than the music. My friend's phone had caught it all. "I'm Michael Carter, 31. And on the night of my engagement party, I discovered the woman I loved might have loved only my money." That evening should have been a celebration. We were 3 months into our engagement after 2 steady years of dating, and the hall was filled with family friends and the kind of champagne chatter you expect at a country club where her family held memberships. For them, appearances were everything. For me, the event was meant to be a turning point, a move toward a future I had built from nothing. I grew up modestly, worked long weeks to build a software company, and at 31 was finally earning about $400,000 a year after taxes. She, Vanessa, was 28, made roughly $30,000 in a good year, teaching yoga part-time and promoting brands online, but she glowed in the kind of spotlight that rooms like that provided. The country club had white linen draped over every table, the lighting soft and golden, and servers moved with trays of sparkling glasses. I felt the familiar gap between her family's old money manners and my working-class roots, but I told myself the evening was not about that divide. I raised my glass, ready to speak with gratitude. That was when she leaned in, tipsy and grinning, and said loud enough for the nearby table to hear, "I just love his house, his car, his portfolio." At first people laughed politely, but the smile on her lips lingered too long. The first sting hit me harder than the alcohol in my glass. I wanted to believe it was a slip, a drunk joke. But then she repeated it almost word for word with a new inflection. "You know I'm marrying him for the money, right? I mean, come on, it's obvious." Chairs shifted. I caught her father's jaw tighten. Her mother looked away, cheeks flushed. I felt my own throat dry. In that moment, the stakes became clear. My reputation, my finances, my dignity, they were all on display, subject to every nod and smirk in the room. I thought of the years grinding out 80-hour weeks, the student loans I had killed off one paycheck at a time, the nights coding in a tiny apartment, when success was only a fragile hope. Every piece of that journey seemed to shrink under her careless laughter. The guests forced chuckles that died quickly. One man coughed. Another stared at his shoes. I noticed Riley, my closest friend, raise his phone slightly, not as part of a crowd selfie, but angled like he was already recording. He caught my eye and I gave the smallest nod. That video would become the first piece of evidence, though none of us said the word out loud. I didn't call Vanessa out then. Instead, I kept my smile fixed, holding my glass steady. Inside my chest was tightening with humiliation, but I knew showing anger would only feed the scene. She thought she was being clever, basking in attention. I let the silence stretch, and the silence spoke louder than her laughter. Around us, the party shifted, conversations faltering, as people processed what they had heard. Her father finally cleared his throat and tried to redirect the toast, but the damage had already been planted. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a public declaration, repeated twice, etched into the memory of 100 eyes and ears, and recorded by one steady hand. The line between humor and confession blurred, and the blur cut into me more sharply than I expected. I raised my glass anyway, forcing my voice into steadiness. I spoke about gratitude, about friends and family gathered, but I heard the undertone in every ear: was this man really just a wallet she had chosen? Each sentence I spoke felt like wading through mud, heavy and slow, as if each listener measured my words against hers. When I lowered my glass, the clinking resumed, but lighter, uncertain. I could almost hear whispers beginning at the edges of the room. Vanessa laughed again, carefree, and pressed her head against my shoulder, as though nothing had happened. My smile stayed, but inside I was marking the moment like a timestamp. That night, a line had been crossed. Whether she realized it or not, she had put her cards on the table in front of everyone. I stood there with my arm around her, every muscle in my body rehearsing restraint. I knew then I could no longer rely on promises or appearances. Only receipts and boundaries would matter going forward. The thought was both sobering and steadying. I felt my humiliation harden into resolve. She had planted her own words, and the room had witnessed them. The first piece of the story was already written, and the rest would follow. As the music picked up again, and servers refilled glasses, I whispered to myself, that was the moment I knew I had to protect myself. The room never fully recovered its rhythm after her second round of jokes. Conversations tried to reform, but the laughter was clipped uncertain, and glances kept sliding back toward us. I felt eyes measure me against her words, as though people were weighing whether I was naive or complicit. I held my smile in place, letting the discomfort sit, but inside I was tallying every repetition. Vanessa didn't stop. A few songs later, with another glass of champagne in her hand, she leaned forward toward a cluster of cousins and said it again. You all know why I said yes, his bank account. The chuckles this time were thin-forced, and the cousins shifted in their chairs. Someone muttered that she should ease up, but she waved it away as if the humor were obvious to anyone paying attention. Her father's face reddened deeper. Her mother pressed her lips tight, staring at the tablecloth as though it might open and escape. The weight of embarrassment wasn't only mine anymore. Still, she carried on, oblivious or unwilling to stop repeating lines about the car, the house, the lifestyle. I realized I was watching a pattern, not an isolated slip. The humiliation swelled. Each remark chipped away, not just at me, but at the credibility of the relationship. I felt the warmth of the room drain into cold scrutiny. Friends who had congratulated us weeks earlier now whispered to one another. I caught sight of Riley again, his phone steady in his hand. The lens was small, but I knew it was capturing every word. That detail steadied me. I tightened my grip on my glass, forcing my knuckles to relax. Anger surged, but I kept it beneath the surface. What mattered was not a scene, not a rash defense, but letting her own words accumulate in plain view. Each statement became a receipt, each laugh a timestamp on a file I had not yet opened. The irony was heavy. She was joking about marrying for money at a party financed by her family's reputation and my labor. The very contrast between her old money parents and my bootstrapped path hung in the air, and her jokes turned that tension into a spectacle. My mind flicked through memories of nights coding until dawn, the lean years of eating ramen and waiting for invoices to clear. Those sacrifices had shaped every dollar I now guarded, and she was reducing them to a punchline. Her friends at one table tried to cover with their own chatter, but their eyes kept darting toward me. I met no one's gaze directly. I wanted them to wonder what I would do to see the calm surface and feel the undercurrent. I was already mapping the moment forward. The repetition was the proof I needed. One careless comment could be excused. Several made a pattern. A pattern once recorded became evidence. I knew then I wouldn't let the evening pass without making clear that I was not the fool she imagined. When she leaned close again and whispered with a smirk, "You're my retirement plan," I simply nodded, letting her believe she had delivered another clever line. Inside, I marked it as the final seed. Enough had been planted. The silence after her words stretched longer this time. Guests shuffled forks, tapped against plates in a clumsy rhythm. Someone tried to start applause for the music, but it fizzled quickly. The air was heavy with awareness everyone had heard, and no one could unhear. I smiled and excused myself to the bar, pretending to refresh my drink. In reality, I was giving the room a chance to breathe, letting her words hang without rescue. I wanted them preserved, unchallenged, so no one could claim later they were misheard or misunderstood. At the bar, I caught Riley's eye. He gave the faintest thumbs up, a gesture small enough to pass as casual, but loaded with confirmation. The record existed. I had witnesses, and I had video. I sipped slowly, tasting nothing but resolve. The plan forming in my mind was simple: let the party proceed, keep my composure, and at the right moment deliver the truth she thought she could laugh away. The night was no longer about celebration. It was about clarity. She had made her choice of words, and I was ready to answer in kind. As the band struck another chord and the crowd tried to pretend normalcy, I set my glass down with care. My decision was sealed. In that silence, I realized everyone had heard her. The party carried on with a brittle cheer, but my mind was already elsewhere. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, watching her mingle, laughing as though nothing had been said. To everyone else, it looked like a carefree evening. To me, it was the unraveling of trust. Yet beneath my steady smile, I carried a quiet certainty. This was not a night I entered unprepared. That morning had been deliberate. Vanessa and I had visited my office under the pretense of signing final details for the venue. She breezed through the papers, phone in hand, distracted by messages. The pages were thick, 3 full copies, each requiring initials at the bottom of every page and signatures at the end. Sitting across the table was Alan Price, a notary and longtime ally. His stamp was heavy, precise, leaving crimson ink that bled slightly into the fibers. I had explained evenly and clearly that these were prenuptial agreements protecting each party's prior assets. She nodded absently, scribbling her name with the same casual grace she used to sign fan merchandise. Alan met my eyes as he stamped the last page. There was no doubt, no loophole. 3 copies notarized, dated. It was a line of defense no one could erase. I replayed that memory while the party swirled. Her jokes landed like daggers, but I knew every word was falling on top of a foundation I had already set. It wasn't deception. It was clarity. She had chosen not to pay attention, and now her own words would collide with the paper she signed. My decision was not made in anger. It was the culmination of years spent learning that effort without protection can vanish. I had built my company brick by brick, code by code, through nights when exhaustion pressed down like lead. The prenup was not just a contract. It was the safeguard of that history. As I lingered by the bar, Riley approached casually, his phone slipping into his pocket. "Got it all," he murmured under his breath, voice low enough to blend into the music. I nodded without turning my head. That video was the first receipt. The prenup was the second. Together they formed a chain. I returned to the table, sliding back into my chair beside Vanessa. She grinned, cheeks flushed from wine, and rested her hand on mine as though nothing had passed. I matched her smile, but inside I was marking boundaries. Her words had been public, but my answer would be precise, controlled, undeniable. The band shifted to a slower song, and guests rose to dance. I leaned close, whispered that I would step out for a moment, and she nodded distractedly, already absorbed in conversation with a cousin. I slipped into the hallway, the quiet a relief after the suffocating air inside. From my pocket, I pulled a copy of the prenup, folded neatly, edges crisp. I didn't need to show it yet. Its weight was enough. I ran my thumb over the embossed notary seal, feeling the ridges. That seal meant more than laughter, more than rumor. It meant law. Standing there, I breathed deeply. The humiliation still burned, but it was tempered by assurance. She could repeat her jokes, the crowd could whisper, but the structure was already in place. The receipts were aligned, and boundaries were clear. I slipped the document back into the envelope and into my jacket. When I re-entered the ballroom, I felt lighter, steadier. The decision was no longer if I would respond, but when. Timing mattered. Exposure required precision. Vanessa caught my arm as I returned. "Where'd you go?" she asked, voice playful. I smiled, brushing it off, telling her I had needed some air. She accepted the answer without pressing. That was her mistake, assuming every movement of mine was casual. As the night wore on, and laughter tried to rebuild itself, I stood ready. I had planted the seeds that morning. All that remained was to let them bloom under the bright light of her own words. She had no idea what she had signed. Vanessa's laughter carried easily across the ballroom, but my focus had narrowed. I no longer cared about the clink of glasses or the band's attempt to keep spirits high. I watched her, noting each sway of her head, each careless gesture that contradicted the vows she claimed to honor. Her words had already drawn blood in front of the crowd. Soon the mechanism behind them would be revealed. I thought back to the moment earlier when she insisted she loved my car, my house, my portfolio. It wasn't simply thoughtless humor. It was a window into how she measured our relationship. The pattern was plain material, first me, second, if at all. She believed her charm was enough to excuse it, that smiles and tipsy jokes would soften the edge. But patterns matter, and I had already built a record strong enough to withstand her denial. The hallway called me again. I stepped outside the main room and leaned against the cool wall. Vanessa followed minutes later, heels clicking on polished tile cheeks, flushed not only from drink, but from the attention she had demanded. "We need to talk," she said sharply, pulling me farther from the crowd. Her tone had shifted. Gone was the playful tease, replaced by irritation edged with panic. "You can't just embarrass me like that," she hissed, though it was her words that had set the fire. I kept my posture calm, shoulders, square voice steady. "You embarrassed yourself," I replied, "and you signed away the right to what you keep bragging about." Her eyes widened, confusion flashing before indignation took over. "I never signed anything like that." It was the venue contract, she snapped. I reached into my jacket and tapped the folded envelope without removing it. 3 copies signed and notarized. Alan stamped each page. "You were there." The words hit her like cold water. She stumbled, shaking her head violently. "No, that's not fair. You tricked me." Tears pooled quickly, mascara smudging under the heat of the lights. She tried to pivot, to turn the accusation into a plea. "How could you do this to me after everything?" Her tactic was transparent: deny, then claim betrayal. But her earlier jokes were still ringing in my ears, captured in Riley's camera, absorbed by 100 witnesses. If I had simply sprung the prenup without context, perhaps she could have played the victim convincingly. But her own pattern of words had already betrayed her. I stayed rooted. "You wanted the house, the car, the money. You said it yourself. This protects what I worked for." She pressed her palms against her temples, pacing the hallway like a caged figure. "You don't love me," she said, voice trembling. "Love doesn't mean blindness," I answered. "Love doesn't mean ignoring every red flag while you turn me into a paycheck." Her breathing quickened. She darted back toward the door of the ballroom, as though seeking an audience, perhaps to twist the narrative. I stepped aside, allowing her path. If she wanted witnesses, she would have them. That was the midpoint I had prepared for her instinct, to expose herself under the same lights she thought would protect her. The mechanism of her manipulation, joking to mask intent, denying when confronted, playing the victim when cornered, was laid bare. I no longer needed to argue it. She was showing it herself. As she shoved the door open, music spilled out, mingling with the chatter of uneasy guests. She raised her voice, tears streaking her cheeks, and shouted, "He tricked me into signing. It's not fair." Heads turned, conversations halted. In that instant, the crowd became the jury. I stood behind her, calm, silent, holding the envelope against my chest, like a quiet verdict. Their eyes shifted from her to me, reading the contrast, her hysteria against my restraint. I didn't need to raise my voice. She was already unraveling. This was the turning point. The private seeds had broken through the surface, and now the entire room could see the roots. Vanessa's cry still echoed in the ballroom, and for a beat the music faltered before the band recovered. All eyes were on her, tears streaking her face, and on me standing steady with the envelope in hand. The party that was supposed to mark the start of our future had turned into a stage. I felt the tension coil tighter, like a net being drawn. She stormed toward me, heels striking sharp against the floor. "You planned this," she spat. "You wanted to humiliate me." I didn't flinch. "I wanted clarity," I said. "You gave it yourself." My voice was calm, carrying enough to reach the tables without sounding like a shout. That contrast mattered. The guests were now witnesses, and every expression on their faces told me they were weighing credibility. Riley moved closer from the side phone, still angled discreetly, capturing each word. His quiet presence reassured me, another layer of documentation to ensure no moment slipped into rumor. I didn't need to add drama. I only needed to hold the line. Vanessa jabbed a finger toward the envelope. "Show them what you tricked me into signing," she demanded. Her tone was shrill, but I knew the document would speak louder than her accusation. Slowly, deliberately, I unfolded one copy and held it at my side, not waving it, not grandstanding, just displaying the embossed notary seal at the bottom. The red ink gleamed under the chandelier. Gasps moved through the crowd. Her father's jaw tightened, her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Vanessa froze for a moment, eyes darting between the paper and the faces around her. The evidence was real, undeniable. "You signed this willingly," I said evenly. "Every page in front of Alan. You laughed about my car and my bank account tonight, and now you claim you were tricked. Which version do you want them to believe? The silence after my words was heavier than any music the band could play. Vanessa's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her own contradictions wrapped around her, suffocating. She tried again, louder this time, but her voice cracked. It was just a joke. Everyone knew I was joking. The crowd didn't laugh. Instead, heads shook. Riley's phone captured the moment in full, her desperation unraveling. Each denial she offered only confirmed the truth already laid out. I let her speak until the words collapsed under their own weight. Then I folded the document back, slid it into the envelope, and tucked it into my jacket. The message was clear. I didn't need theatrics. I had law on my side. The net was tightening. Her credibility was shrinking with every outburst, while my restraint amplified the gravity of what she had confessed earlier. Friends who once looked at us with envy now exchanged glances that said everything they saw the truth and they would remember. I turned slightly toward Riley and gave a subtle nod. He understood we were not just gathering proof anymore. We were preparing for the final confrontation. The receipts were verified, the audience attentive, the stakes undeniable. Vanessa's sobs filled the pause. She clutched her dress, mascara running, yet still tried to regain footing. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, almost pleading. I held her gaze. "You did this to yourself." The crowd shifted again, murmurs rising, and I knew the climax was near. All that remained was to let the final piece fall into place where she would expose herself beyond repair. The hall was restless. Conversations pulsing in hushed tones as people weighed what they had witnessed. I could feel the scrutiny pressing against my back, but it did not unsettle me. It steadied me. The room was no longer a celebration. It had transformed into a tribunal with Vanessa struggling at its center. She paced the edge of the dance floor, clutching her glass with trembling fingers, trying to salvage her image. "You're all misunderstanding," she said loudly, her voice breaking. "He's twisting things." But the words landed flat. Too many had heard her earlier, too many had seen the document. I stood a few steps behind Hans, relaxed at my sides, the envelope secure in my jacket. The decision had already been made. This confrontation would not be buried in whispers. I would let her voice unravel, and then I would anchor the truth. Riley shifted closer, his phone still steady. "Everything's rolling," he muttered, his eyes locked on the frame. His calm presence was like ballast in a storm. I nodded slightly, preparing for what came next. Vanessa turned to me again, eyes wet and wild. "Michael, please, don't do this here," she begged, lowering her tone, hoping for privacy. The irony stung. She had made her declarations in front of a crowd, and now she feared the same stage. "You chose the stage," I replied quietly but firmly. "I chose the receipts." Her shoulders sagged, and then almost reflexively she raised her voice. "He's lying. I never meant it like that. It was all just jokes." Her attempt to laugh fell flat, brittle, and hollow. The guests had seen enough. Heads shook, lips tightened, some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The performance had lost its audience. I glanced toward the clock above the bar, 10 minutes to midnight. A fitting mark for endings. My plan had been to wait, but her unraveling was already writing the conclusion. I cleared my throat, letting my voice carry. "You heard her tonight. More than once. And you saw this." I tapped the envelope lightly. "The truth doesn't need more words. It's written, signed, and stamped." Her protest collapsed into sobs. She stumbled back toward her parents, who caught her by the arms. Her father's face was granite, her mother's expression hollow. They could not undo what she had planted. The weight of the room shifted. For the first time all evening, I felt air fill my lungs without resistance. The confrontation was no longer building, it was upon us. Riley stopped recording and slipped the phone into his pocket. He leaned toward me. "That's enough. You've got everything." He was right. The evidence was complete, the audience convinced, the law on my side. The rest was fallout. I walked to the bar, asked quietly for water, and sipped, while Vanessa's sobs filled the space. No anger, no raised voice. Just calm resolution. My silence spoke louder than any defense could. The confrontation had been rehearsed in my mind. but it played out more raw than I imagined. Still, the receipts held. The notary seal, the signatures, the video, every piece in its place. The stage was set for the inevitable payoff. The moment arrived without ceremony, though it carried the weight of finality. Vanessa wrenched herself free from her parents' arms and stormed back toward me, her heels snapping like gunshots against the marble floor. Her face was streaked with mascara, her chest heaving with fury. The room fell into a hush, waiting for the next blow. She stopped 2 feet from me, voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. "This wedding is off," she screamed, and before anyone could intervene, her hand flew across my cheek in a stinging slap. The sound echoed louder than the band's instruments, louder than the gasps that followed. I didn't move. I stood steady, letting the sting fade into something colder, vindication. Around us, chairs, scraped glasses clinked, and whispers burst into full-throated commentary. Riley's phone was already lifted again, steady as a tripod. The confrontation had found its peak, and I would not waste it. I turned toward the room, speaking evenly, my voice firm but not raised. "You all heard her tonight. You heard the words more than once, and now you've seen the response." I touched my cheek lightly, then let my hand drop. "This isn't love. This is proof." Vanessa shrieked. "He trapped me." Her words cracked, broken by sobs. She gestured wildly, trying to summon sympathy. But the guests, instead of nodding, looked away or shook their heads. The weight of the evidence was too great. I pulled the envelope from my jacket, holding it where the seal caught the chandelier's light. 3 copies. Signed. Stamped. Protected. I didn't need to open it. The mere presence was enough. Gasps rippled again, louder this time. Her father stepped forward, his face pale. He opened his mouth as if to intervene, but her mother caught his arm. They stayed silent. The public record was already complete. Vanessa's voice rose to a wail. "You'll regret this." But her words lacked conviction, collapsing under their own hollowness. I answered with the calm of someone who had already won. "No. I'll sleep well tonight, knowing I didn't lose myself to a lie." The silence that followed was heavy, then broken by a smattering of murmurs. Someone near the back muttered, "Good for him." Another voice, quieter but clear. "She did it to herself." The crowd's verdict was written not on paper, but in tone and body language. Riley lowered his phone, satisfied. He met my eyes and gave a nod. The receipts had been delivered, the confrontation complete. Vanessa collapsed into a chair, sobbing, her dress pooling around her like a crumpled flag. The band stopped altogether. For a moment, the only sounds were her wails and the clink of a glass being set down. I slipped the envelope back into my jacket, buttoned it neatly, and let my gaze sweep the room. "The wedding is over," I said quietly, but clearly enough for all to hear. And so is the silence. No one argued. No one comforted her. The evidence had spoken. The ballroom emptied in fragments after the outburst. Some guests lingered in uneasy clusters, whispering over half-finished drinks, while others made quiet exits, coats draped over their arms, shoes clicking on marble, as if eager to escape the spectacle. I remained still, my pulse steady at last. The confrontation had burned through, and all that remained was resolution. Riley approached with a calm expression, handing me his phone. "Every second's on here," he said. I slipped the device into my jacket pocket alongside the prenup envelope. The combination was airtight words captured on video signatures sealed by law. Proof in 2 forms, both undeniable. Vanessa sat slumped in a chair. Her sobs softer now, shoulders quaking. Her parents hovered beside her, silent, their eyes fixed on the floor. They offered no comfort, no defense. The weight of the evening had shifted irreversibly. No narrative could rewrite what everyone had witnessed. I excused myself from the hall without ceremony, the night air cool as I stepped outside. The sky was clear stars, sharp against the darkness, a reminder that life stretched beyond this narrow humiliation. I inhaled deeply, the air crisp with relief. The following morning, I met Riley at a cafe. He slid the video across the table on a thumb drive, the plastic small but powerful. "Backed up twice," he assured me. We watched a clip in silence, Vanessa's laughter, Her words repeated my calm responses, the final slap. The camera never wavered. The truth was framed and permanent. At the office later, Alan confirmed the copies of the prenup were secure. Stamped and filed, he said with professional detachment. No contest possible. His words were clinical, but the reassurance was grounding. News of the broken engagement spread quickly. In our circle, the narrative was not mine to push. It carried itself. Colleagues, friends, even distant acquaintances who had once envied our match now offered quiet validation. You did the right thing, they said. Better now than later. Each phrase landed like a balm, soothing the sting of public exposure. The financial stakes were intact. My house, my car, my company shares, all protected. The prenup had done its work before the wedding ever could. More important, my dignity remained whole. Vanessa's image, however, bore the fracture of her own words, her own actions. One evening, a week later, I sat at home with a cup of coffee as sunlight filtered through the blinds. The video drive rested in my safe, the documents filed neatly. I touched neither. They were no longer weapons. They were simply records of a boundary upheld. I reflected not on loss, but on preservation. I hadn't lost a marriage. I had safeguarded a lifetime. Trust once broken cannot be patched with apologies whispered after public betrayal. Love without respect is hollow, and boundaries once ignored must be enforced. As I closed the safe, I whispered to myself the quiet truth I had earned. I walked away intact. The words felt final, not bitter, just steady. The lesson was simple, and I hoped it lingered with anyone who heard the story. Guard what you build, and never confuse charm for commitment. The story of that night never needed embellishment. It carried its own gravity. Vanessa's laughter, her careless confessions, the slap in front of 100 witnesses, those images replayed in the minds of everyone who attended. For me, the lesson was not about vengeance, but about preservation. I had spent my 20s building something from scratch, piece by piece, through trial, error, and long nights. Allowing that foundation to be stripped away by someone who valued the trappings over the person would have been the real mistake. The prenup was never about distrust. It was about clarity. It forced truth into the open truth Vanessa was unwilling to face until her own words betrayed her. Without that paper, her jokes might have been brushed aside, excused as drunken slips. With it, the contrast was sharp and undeniable, her intentions set against my preparation. I walked away from the engagement, not with bitterness, but with relief. The humiliation of that evening was temporary. The protection of my boundaries was permanent. Friends reached out with support. Colleagues treated me with newfound respect, and my own reflection in the mirror grew steadier. The outcome was not the loss of a future, but the safeguarding of one. I keep the video and the documents locked away, not as weapons, but as reminders. They symbolize the strength of drawing a line when respect is missing. They remind me that silence is not weakness, and that receipts spoken and written carry more weight than any argument. To anyone who finds themselves questioning whether to defend what they've built, do it. Protect yourself lawfully, calmly, and decisively. Love without respect is a hollow bargain. Dignity is worth more than appearances. I didn't lose a marriage that night. I preserved my life.